Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Vlog 50, the meta vlog. This is the vlog where we talk about my motivations, my rationale for this vlog series, but also I insert the Research Higher Degree program from Flinders into wider debates about higher education studies, multimodality, and information literacy. But it is important, therefore, that I commence acknowledging and thanking our remarkable colleagues both inside and outside Flinders University who work in higher education studies. And we span throughout the disciplines, moving from health education and the Prudhoe Centre, hello to everyone at the Prudhoe Centre, through to the remarkable work in medical education. We have a very emerging and interesting area in science literacy, but also understanding the diversity of our colleagues in information science, information studies, and informatics. I also need to acknowledge the remarkable colleagues we have who operate in the broad discipline of education. Yes, higher education studies, but also incorporating early years, primary, secondary, the disciplinary curricular expertise from STEM-based education through to creative arts and yes, VET, vocational education, and further education. And the reason why the settling in of this vlog series and what we're doing at Flinders University in wider debates about education matter so much is because we're trying to build up the relationship between teaching and research. For me, an academic should and must do both. You see, what makes the university academic's role so unique, I think, is all of us on a daily basis are interested in creating new knowledge. We create knowledge, but we also teach the next generation that new knowledge so they can go on and transform our disciplines once more. It's organic, it's powerful, and it's important to what we do. So this is our 50th vlog, and I've done one every single week since I started at Flinders University. So yes, we're almost hitting my 1 year anniversary in this role. And when I was preparing to take on this new job, I spent a fair amount of time looking at the sociology of the Research Higher Degree cohort at Flinders University. That meant that I really was trying to understand who you are. And indeed, when I conducted this research, I found that the Research Higher Degree cohort at Flinders was actually quite distinct from the Research Higher Degree cohort around the world. Firstly, this is a comprehensive university. And what that means is we have students that span from the hard sciences right the way through to the high humanities. So that was quite transformative for the policy work that I would be enacting in this role. That meant that the materials that I created for you in and through these vlogs had to have some relevance to most of the students most of the time. And that meant, of course, I didn't go, and still will never go, into disciplinary specialisms. So you would never see a vlog on the management of a particular chemical, and you would never see a vlog on inserting poetry into your PhD. So therefore, what sort of topics would be mostly interesting to most students most of the time? Well, obviously employability is important. The research culture internationally is important, but also thinking about teaching and learning. And they are the topics that we've explored through this vlog series. So we've picked up already, this is a comprehensive university. So that was very important for what we did in these vlogs. But there were other very important sociological imperatives for me to deploy through this series. Now, the average age of commencing PhD students around the world is 34. Now at Flinders, the average starting age for students is actually a little bit older than that. So that means we have students straight out of the pathway from school to undergraduate degree to honours and a PhD program. But we also have a very large group of our students who have had an incredibly successful professional life from which they have retired and they enter our PhD program to enact a passion, something they've always wanted to look at, and to commence the next stage of their professional career that may emerge in consultancies or publishing or some new type of employment option. So that means we have students in our early 20s and our late 70s. So therefore, as you can see, this comprehensive university also had very specific imperatives with regard to the age of our students. And that meant your goals, your expectations, your dreams are very different depending where you are on that age spectrum. Now, there were two other variables that I was investigating and exploring when thinking about this vlog series. And the first of those is 1/3 of our students are part-time. And secondly, 1/3 of our students live outside of South Australia. And it's not the same third. So therefore, once I was processing this very specific sociology of Flinders PhD and Research Master's students, I tried to think about a way I could communicate with you that would speak to you at your particular point in the candidature and where you were and are in terms of your career. So I also wanted to configure a communication strategy that if a student wasn't remotely interested in anything I had to say, and that's absolutely tremendous, that they could simply opt out of it. So an email would arrive each week, and if a student wasn't interested, they could simply delete that email and never have to worry about the content. So that's important to me. This is adult education. You decide your priorities, you decide your imperatives. So if you're not interested, I had to find a way that simply a student could delete an email and get on with their candidature. So that's how I stumbled onto the vlog idea. I could produce it at no cost to Flinders University. Obviously, Steve and I have bought the tech, basically paid for the stuff that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, but it meant that all of the money in our portfolio would go to you, to our students and to our staff, and enable your careers. So we used the free distribution mechanism that is the nature of Web 2. Now, I decided to do one vlog a week, and there was a reason for that. That communication mode was based on my experience as a head of school and head of department at my last 3 universities around the world. And this model had proved very successful. So what I was doing is I was offering a weekly communication strategy to my colleagues, to staff, and also to PhD students, talking particularly about specific areas of expertise-driven material internationally that may be of use. As always, staff and students could simply delete the email if they weren't interested, but most were. And very successful research cultures were generated from this communication strategy. And that was verified through the RAE, the REF, and ERA. And that's based on incremental communications, developing a relationship and seeing what may be of use to you. And speaking of evidence-driven, the other imperative that I wanted to enact through these vlogs is to make sure that you were getting the best international research to think about your candidature. As you've heard me say in the past, one great problem, I think, in the PhD space is it's experience-driven, not expertise-driven. And that experience is made worse, of course, because so few people in universities hold teaching qualifications. It's assumed that holding a PhD creates expertise in teaching and learning. And as I think we all know, that's simply not the case. So without this disciplinary-based expertise in education, teaching and learning, there is this assumption that experience in supervision is the same as expertise in supervision. And of course, that's not the case either. But having said that, most of the time, experience in supervision does okay. But if problems hit a candidature, or indeed as we have at the moment in higher education, the sector is changing radically, then we need new imperatives, evidence-driven protocols to ensure our program is modern. So therefore we talk a great deal in these vlogs about andragogical practices and behaviours that are being deployed around the world. So every vlog, including this one, is based on between 40 and 50 refereed articles, really innovative scholarly monographs, and in some case, emerging and important materials in the non-refereed literature, if I'm thinking, this area is going to be big, and the research literature is lagging a little bit. So for example, in the Pinterest vlog, that was an example of that, and also relationships and the PhD. Both of those had some refereed literature, but mainly non-refereed as the issue was starting to be looked through and researched. So I hope that these vlogs are personable and welcoming. That's what I want them to be, but they're also evidence-driven. My focus has been particularly on summoning international doctoral studies. So there's some very important journals now situated, clustered in this field. And I want to make sure that Flinders University is absolutely at the cutting edge of where this research is taking us. You see, universities have changed radically in the last decade. Publishing has changed radically in the last decade, and indeed publishing has changed radically, I would argue, in the last 2 years. So I need to make sure you are getting the best advice that is at the cusp of knowledge. The other problem I had to address was how I was going to reach the 1/3 of those students outside of South Australia. So I am your dean, and it is important whether you're living in Alberta in Canada, Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, Egg and Bacon Bay in Tasmania, or Port Macquarie in regional New South Wales, that you gain what I call a parity of service. A parity of service. So that means I'm continually looking for strategies with our colleagues in IT, in library and student support, student services, to find ways to create as much outreach as we can for you. Also, I'm very conscious of our students in the Territory. I think I've met just about every one of you now, either face-to-face or via Skype, and you are outstanding people. But every day I wake up and I think, how can we improve our service to the great men and women in the Territory? And so every decision I make, I always think, right, what can we do to make sure we've got that parity of service? So this means I had to find a way via disintermediated media to communicate with you directly. Now, the overwhelming majority of these vlogs, the topics of the vlogs, came from you. We're running at about 85%. Now that's a surprise. When I started, I thought maybe 10% of the vlogs and the ideas might come from you. That's not the case. The overwhelming majority of ideas are coming from you and are still coming from you. So you send me a message about something that you're interested in, intrigued about, or is worrying you, and I will look at the refereed literature and try and build up a portfolio of options for you that may address your issue. Now, if there wasn't enough material, and for example, I'm always researching about 10 vlogs at a time, and some areas that you're suggesting, the research literature is not quite there yet. So literally your pile is sitting upstairs in my office on the floor, and as we get enough research where I can speak with some commitment and some scholarship, then we'll do that vlog. Now, as many of you know, I'm a scholar of media education, and media literacy. So it was very important to me, noting the sociology of our cohort, that I enacted the best interface management I could. I selected the best platform to suit you. So I settled on a vlog, and that was very, very challenging for me as well. A weekly vlog is quite challenging because every week I had to do the research, I had to write up a vlog, and then I had to learn it to make sure that you would get the best and the cleanest delivery that I could give you. And it is important, I think, there is a symbolic functionality I was thinking about as well, because as a senior staff member in an Australian university, but also as a senior Australian woman in higher education, it was important to me that I be courageous, that I stare down the attacks, I stare down the sexism, I stare down the abuse, the undermining of my qualifications, the undermining of my research, and rise above it and show leadership, modelling for all of you. And that higher expectation of myself, the anti-bullying imperative that I've carried throughout my career, meant that I managed and had to put up with the abuse that might be about how I look or my voice, abuse of my family, abuse of my husband, and also abuse about my research. But really there have been very, 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 very few attacks. It's been remarkable, and thousands upon thousands upon thousands of emails from you, tweets, Facebook, LinkedIn posts expressing enthusiasm and passion and interest. And also I've got thousands of emails, not only from you, but from your partner, from your parents, from your children, and yes, Andrew, even from your grandchildren. And they have meant the world to me. I've also received cards and emails and letters from all over the world, every single continent, yes, including a scientist who was returning from Antarctica, who knew? And incredibly, these vlogs have had 30,000 views in the last 50 weeks. 30,000 views. No one is more shocked or surprised about that figure than me. When I started, I thought maybe 5 or 10 of our students in the Territory or beyond South Australia might like to have a look at their new dean. So I thought we might get 5 or 10 people viewing each week. But hundreds of you view each week, and universities around the world are now using this material. So once I made the decision about the vlogs, that is the form, it was important to then move into the content. What type of work was I going to talk about here? So I always knew from the start that there was going to be a sub-genre in these vlogs of students, where I would introduce particular students to you. It is very important to talk about peer learning in the doctoral space. It is very rare, but I wanted you to see our actual students and see them express their hopes, their dreams, their failures, their disappointments, and their triumphs. And they're actually my favourite vlogs, to see our remarkable students. They remain inspirational. But also I made a decision that when I travelled around the world, so if I was delivering keynotes, and I try to not deliver keynotes in this current job, but when I do deliver keynotes around the world, that I would be able to pack up the camera, pack up the tripod, and do the vlogs on the road. So you would meet fantastic international scholars and again gain a new aspiration and a new inspiration. The goal has never been and will never be for you to agree with me or anybody else you meet on these vlogs. Not interested in that. We are scholars, you are very, very bright. You can decide whether you agree with me or not, that's great, but I want reflection. You thinking about the nature of higher degrees, thinking about the nature of the university system. So my goal was always to present ideas for your consideration, because reflection is productive. In a doctoral program, it can be incredibly narrow. It can be incredibly claustrophobic. For my great criminologists out there, there's no doubt the Sykes and Matzer technique of neutralisation can clearly be in place, because doctoral education can be a bit of an echo chamber. And so for me, I wanted to find ways to offer alternatives to and for you for your consideration. Something for you to think about, maybe off-piste, but may actually encourage you to think critically about your own discipline. So I'm building on Alison King's outstanding work, From Sage on the Stage to a Guide on the Side. And I'm taking that really powerful article and applying it to not only the doctoral space, but thinking about leadership in a doctoral program. The final reason I did these blogs that I'd like to express with you is a political imperative. This was important to me because we are living in difficult times of Guy Standing's The Precariat. We live in anti-intellectual times, times where so many people around us critique ideas, critique debate, critique argument. So I wanted the Flinders Research Higher Degree program to stand for something. I wanted us to stand for intellectual generosity. Not jealousy, not rudeness, but cultural safety, open access, decency, kindness, respect for intelligence, respect for qualifications, and respect for ideas. So for me, this is leadership. And that means every email, every contact, every conversation I may have with you or colleagues around the world, no matter if I receive abuse or disrespect or nastiness or bullying personally, I will never, ever, ever return that. Always cultural safety and integrity guide my words. Always. So for me, as your dean, that's incredibly important. It's also important as a woman in leadership that we lead from the front and we lead with kindness and integrity. So these vlogs are not standardised. We have 1,200 students in our PhD and Master's program at Flinders, and each one of you is different with different goals and dreams and expectations. So that means I wanted bespoke, customised programs for all of you. So that means when you select professional development, you select the vlogs or the PD that suits you at this particular time. This is not a Fordist, let's pump the students through program at all. This is you picking and mixing and determining what suits you at this point of your candidature. Because doctoral and master's education is teaching and learning. So my job is to enable reflection on that teaching and learning, reflection on your candidature. This is, to summon David Schon's work, hi Amy, a reflexive practice, and Steve Brookfield, who was so influential to me as an early career academic, used the great phrase that we need to think about why we believe what we believe, why we believe what we believe. And that's what these vlogs are about. You see, a PhD offers an original contribution to knowledge, the what. But part of my role is to ask you every now and again to think about the why. Why you are conducting this research, why you're doing a PhD or a master's degree, and why your knowledge matters. So when I started this vlog series, I wrote in my preliminary notes that I summoned again this week actually, that if I got to 50 vlogs, then vlog 50 would be the meta vlog, why I was doing it. But if I didn't get to 50, this would never be recorded. And also I very much wanted to hit the ground running with content for you rather than thinking about the why. I wanted to go to the what first and then explain to you why we're doing it this way. And indeed, we are the only university in the world where the Dean has decided to enact a vlog series such as this. My imperative is to listen to you, to hear what you need. And if I have the capacity to find the research and provide an alternative for you or an option for you or even one step forward, then it is my pleasure to do so. How long will we have these vlogs? Well, I can't answer that question. I'm still receiving requests from you every single day about future vlogs, and I've literally got 10 vlogs on the go upstairs in my office. But I've also received hundreds of requests from non-Flinders students around the world for particular vlogs. And at this point, I haven't done those requests because I am your dean, your priorities matter to me. But going forward, I may increasingly talk about some of those great ideas that have come from students around the world. And an enormous thank you to all the wonderful students, wherever you are in the world, and what you've done for us at Flinders. Thank you for your support. But there may be a point where the online abuse gets too hectic, and Steve gets abused, my 89-year-old father gets abused. There will be a line where if the abuse gets too nasty, then I will just simply stop. And obviously every generation of students needs new ideas and new priorities. But for my term as Dean, my priorities remain as they were when we started. Excellence and social justice, excellence through social justice. I want to thank every single one of you for your support, your enthusiasm, your energy, your incredible passion for what we are doing at Flinders University. I want to thank you for the emails, for the Facebook posts, for the tweets, for the LinkedIn links. It's unbelievable. You are just incredible. And particularly, I want you to always know that your time is precious. And thank you for sharing some of your time with me. As always, I wish you love, light, and peace. And for this 50th vlog, tea out.